Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Today, we'll be having a discussion on nutritional supplements and health with a herbalist and expert natural supplement formulator, Jared St. Clair. Jared has over 30 years hands-on experience running Vitality Nutrition, a well-known health food store in Utah, and he also consults with clients privately. He's known for his Vital 5 essential supplements. He's crafted highly effective formulas and protocols for health concerns, from digestive issues and hormone imbalances to immune support and emotional wellness. As the host of the Vitality Radio podcast, Jared educates listeners on mastering nutritional supplements to thrive without pharmaceuticals. Jared, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
That's great. So perhaps we could start this discussion by giving us your opinion of where we are in terms of the health of our country. Are things getting worse, better? I'll just tell you, my own impression is that chronic diseases continue to increase. Obesity rates continue to increase, though maybe GLP-1 agonist drugs are here to save us. But certainly, the standard American diet does not seem to be improving as ultra-processed foods seem to proliferate. And as costs go up, people consume even more of these ultra-processed foods.
Yeah, I think you're pretty much on the same page as I am. I do think, I always like to have a positive outlook on life as much as possible. I think that's actually one of the biggest keys to optimal health. So I'm always looking at the silver lining of what's going on out there, right? And it's kind of an interesting thing because as we see our health degrading as a country and to some extent as in this entire, on this entire planet, but I think America is uniqually not so great.
Yes, we
lead the way in bad
exactly.
So go USA, right? But as we see that, we also see people getting to the point of so much frustration with what they've been doing that hasn't been working, that they are looking for alternatives and they're looking for options. And I believe we actually are in a bit of a kind of a renaissance period where people are really digging in to understand their health, and more people taking charge of their own health. One of the things I say on my show a lot is that I think one of the biggest mistakes that's happened in our culture in America is that we've essentially been taught to turn our health over to some kind of an expert, whether that's a guy in a white coat or a guy at a health store or a chiropractor or a functional medicine doctor or whoever it is. I really think that's a mistake, period. I think we need to be in charge of our own health. And then we use those people as, sounding boards for advice, for recommendations. But to just go into an appointment and do as you're told and kind of offload that responsibility onto somebody else, I think is a really, really slippery slope into pretty bad health.
Yeah, I love that sign behind you that everybody's entitled to your opinion.
Not everybody wants it, but they're all entitled.
So on a personal level, how's your health food store doing?
Well, my store is doing great, actually. It's interesting because we are an independent mom and pop health food store. We still have one location. We've had one location for 48 years, actually. This week, as we're recording, we're preparing for our 48th birthday sale at the end of this week. So it's been going a long time. I'm 53, so I was 5 when my parents opened the place. My son has been working with me now for about 10 or 11 years, so we're fully into that third generation. And it's interesting because stores like mine are kind of a dying breed for sure. There's more and more independent stores that were started by, really good, well-meaning people that have just not been able to survive, the Amazon age, every big box store in the world has vitamins and herbs now.
Right.
Costco, one of their biggest categories is supplementation. And that just wasn't a thing when we started. Heck, when we started, supplements were barely a thing back in 1977. So it has been difficult, but what I've found is that education is what people are really starving for. People really want to understand if they're going to put something in their body, they want to understand why they're putting it in there, what to expect when it gets there, and how to tell if it's working or not working. And there's a lot of questions about how in the heck do I tell just looking at a bottle if it's a good product or not? And so I spend a lot of my time trying to help people figure that stuff out.
Well, that's good because you're definitely not getting anybody to help educate you at Costco.
Well, yeah. Yeah, they want in and out. Nobody gets hurt over at Costco. Right? And really, I mean, that's even the case with the big, to a large degree, with the big supplement stores, your Whole Foods and natural grocers as well.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of education there.
No, absolutely. It's very hard to get anybody who has any clue in Whole Foods.
Yeah.
So that's great. So that's one of the keys is providing education and personal service.
Yeah, I think that is the key to what we've done here. We've always taken that very seriously, and we've gotten a nice little group of people that support us locally. And then our website, vitalitynutrition.com, which launched about close to 4 years ago now. We have a chat feature on there where people ask questions, and we're right there to answer those questions. And people can call us even if they're not in Utah where we're located. You can call our phone number, and we're happy to help you with questions over the phone as well. Our big focus is education and really trying to help you understand and make decisions that make sense when it comes to your supplementation.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about gut health, which is one of my favorite topics.
Sure.
Why don't we start with IBS or SIBO? What's your take on that? What sorts of strategies have you found to be effective?
Sure. So, IBS, of course, as you probably know, and I would imagine a lot of your listeners know, is a bit of a catch-all diagnosis, right? People that get chronic diarrhea or constipation or cramping or bloating.
By the way, for those who don't know, IBS stands for irritable bowel syndrome.
Right. So it's like kind of a disease state, I guess, but it's all over the place. And there's even categories within IBS, right? IBS-C, which are people that lean more towards constipation, IBS-D, people that lean more towards diarrhea. And there's a bunch of stuff in the middle that is kind of IBS too. But the problem with IBS is there isn't really a medical answer to it at all. Some doctors will recommend things like a low FODMAP diet, that sort of thing. But other than that, they might recommend Tums after a meal or, Mylanta or that kind of stuff. They really don't have a lot of answers. And I guess to some degree, that's modern medicine in a nutshell.
Well, I'll be honest with you, for a lot of years, one of the most common recommendations for IBS, especially considering that the overwhelming majority of IBS sufferers are women, were antidepressants.
Yeah, and still is a major category of prescribing. You're right. And that initially, when I very first heard that, I thought, I don't even understand what they're thinking there. But then as I started digging into this is years ago now.
Well, I think they were thinking that's a stress-related disorder.
Well, yeah, it started making sense as to why it might help because we know that the gut-brain connection is this really, really strong connection. There's more, communication going up and down that vagus nerve from gut to brain and brain to gut than any other nerve system in the body, any other highway, if you want to call it, in the body. And, SSRIs, which are what's typically prescribed, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac or Zoloft, have been recommended. Initially, I thought, well, they're just trying to get people to, feel better, have less stress, and maybe they'll have less gut issues. But we also know now that like 90% of the serotonin that's made in the body is made in the gut and then shuttled up to the brain. And so it made sense to me that at least that prescribing, which I think is a terrible idea because it doesn't fix the problem at all. And it comes with a load of potential side effects. I just did a whole show on SSRIs last week talking about that. But it at least made sense what the thought process was once I kind of dug into it.
Well, it turns out that the prescribers had no idea about this but it's actually the case that there are a huge amount of serotonin receptors in the gut.
Right.
A big part of IBS is a lack of motility problem. And it turns out that stimulating the serotonin in the gut stimulates those serotonin receptors, which actually improves gut motility.
Yeah.
And so that's why you'll see 5-HTP in some pro-motility natural supplements.
Right. Yeah. So there was a rhyme or reason to it, at least. I mean, it's technically off-label prescribing. You know, those drugs were never made for that. But some people did get relief with it. But what's interesting is if you start to kind of dial backwards from that thought process, you start to recognize maybe that it isn't the brain or serotonin in the brain that's actually creating a lot of these depression and anxiety issues. It's actually the gut that isn't able to produce the hormones that are needed to be produced in the levels that they're needing to be produced. And so then if we're trying to resolve it by just making more serotonin, you're not going to resolve anything. You may feel better, at least in the short term, but there's no real resolution if the problem actually started in the gut and we're giving a drug that really primarily acts in the brain. So when people come into me and they say, I've got IBS or I've got Crohn's or I've got ulcerative colitis or SIBO or whatever, the first thing let me back that up. I started that wrong. If people say I've got depression or anxiety, the first thing I think is gut. And then I ask them about IBS and SIBO and some of these other things and ask them if they actually have gut issues because they know they don't feel good, right? They're depressed, they're anxious, whatever it is. And I'm telling you, maybe 8 times out of 10, when I ask that question, they say, oh, yeah, I struggle in that area too. My gut isn't, I don't feel good after I eat. I have chronic diarrhea or constipation or whatever. And the studies actually play that out, that is a connection that's extremely common. I'm going to give you a number based on memory, and I might be wrong on this, so don't hold me to the exact number, but I think it's like 65%, if I remember correctly, of women who have been diagnosed with MDD, major depressive disorder, are also diagnosed with IBS. And so there's a really strong correlation there. And to me, that means the gut is where it starts and the brain is kind of where it ends. And we really need to look at the gut first.
Sure. And then, of course, we have SIBO, which we now know is a major cause of IBS problems.
For sure. And it's interesting, too, because now that's kind of new, right? I think a lot of people listening to shows like your show and my show maybe haven't even heard of SIBO before. I don't know how much you talk about it. I've recently started talking about it a lot because I have a lot more people asking me about it.
Yeah, we've been talking about SIBO a lot.
Have you? Yeah.
For years, yeah. But, I've had Dr. Pimentel on a number of times, and he's the guy who really has done a lot of primary research proving that SIBO is the main cause of IBS.
Yeah, and I'm starting to lean that way too. And I used to really put most of my focus on what's going on in the colon, which of course is at the bottom of the digestive tract, and I wasn't paying much attention into what might be going on up above that in the small intestine.
Right. But
as you start to recognize that the small intestine is very I'll say vulnerable, maybe more in the American, in the way that we do things with the American diet and with antibiotics and with PPIs in America. We have some real problems. We put people who have reflux on proton pump inhibitors, and that reduces stomach acid. And stomach acid is supposed to help us digest our food, but not just that. It's also one of the primary protectors of bacteria not making it into the small intestinal tract where it can create problems.
Right.
So a lot of people that have issues, in the esophagus and the stomach up, and then that drug is creating issues from the esophagus down, right? And so just exacerbating things and making people worse, not better.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as you're talking about, hydrochloric acid produced in the stomach is one of the things that keeps bacteria from building up in the small intestine, as well as digestive enzymes, as well as the normal cleansing waves from our motility. Do you ever do testing for things like SIBO or gut testing, stool testing?
So at our place, because we don't have any doctors on staff or practitioners, we don't do that. We do often refer people out for that.
Right.
And we will recommend a lot of what I do initially is just help people see what the problem might be.
Right.
Ask a lot of questions. Get a lot of feedback from the client to see, okay, what might be going on. And then in many cases, you can kind of, put the dots together and recognize, what probably is going on.
Right.
And there are some things that are relatively universal. You mentioned digestive enzymes. I think that's something that way too few people are talking about. That's such a critical component, especially once we get into our 30s and 40s and on up. Everybody talks about probiotics. Probiotics are great, but very few people are talking about digestive enzymes. And one thing that I'm talking a lot more about recently, probably for the last 10 years, is boosting up that stomach acid, whether it's things like apple cider vinegar or taking HCl when that makes sense. And then, of course, helping people as much as possible, because I actually dealt with this as a younger man. When I was 26 years old, I had really severe acid reflux, really, really bad case of it. My doctor that did a scope on me said I was one of the worst cases he'd ever seen, and he did 800 of those scopes a year. So, and that was when I was much younger, much dumber, probably than I am, hopefully than I am now, and really just wasn't listening to the advice that my parents had been giving me as a child, and was eating all kinds of junk and was under a lot of stress and all that stuff. But because I was able to shut down acid reflux, I haven't had that issue in 27 years now.
What was the key to you overcoming your acid reflux?
Well, one thing was diet change. I definitely beefed up the natural and reduced the hyper processed foods and all that kind of stuff. But primarily what I did was adjusted supplementation. I did go on key probiotics back then. I started using significant doses of digestive enzymes, which frankly, someone at 25, 26 years old back then, 26 years ago, in most cases would probably have enough digestive enzymes that they're producing. But what I recognized that I didn't recognize then, because I just wasn't as educated then as I am now, is that one of my biggest issues, probably my very biggest issue, was I had two businesses back then. I had the supplement store that I still have now, Vitality Nutrition. And then as a young and, kind of starry-eyed kid, I also bought another business and thought I could run them together and be successful. And I created myself just a massive amount of excess stress.
What was your other business?
No, I was just an advertising franchise. I was going into little businesses like mine and trying to sell them advertising.
I see.
I got snookered big time. The person that sold me the business lied to me about all the stuff. I lost $200,000 in the first year and a half of doing that business. I didn't have that money to lose. I was broke at the time already, so that was all debt that I created. And I was eating out a lot because I was on the road a lot. So I was eating out. I was eating under stress. That's one thing that I don't know if you talk about this on your show, but I talk about it a lot on mine. We've got to learn to slow down when we eat and put ourselves into a rest and digest state before we eat so that our body's digestive capacity is optimized. I recognize now that I was probably working on 10 or 20% of my digestive capacity because I was always eating in a hurry and I was always eating under stress.
Right.
And that's, I think, what created it more than anything.
Absolutely. You got to try to get into that parasympathetic state.
Yeah.
What about IBS? What are some of the strategies you use for IBS?
So with IBS, because again, it's kind of a general term and there's different things, I will quiz people a little bit more about, where they're at on that kind of spectrum, I guess, of IBS. And so I'll make recommendations a little bit different.
Let's say you have somebody with constipation and they have bloating and abdominal pain.
Okay. So I actually, based on my experience with acid reflux about 15 years ago, I developed a formula that we call Back on Track. And it's a combination of digestive enzymes. It has peppermint, ginger, and fennel in there as well, which are nice natural anti-inflammatory herbs for the gut. And then it's got some key spore probiotics, one called Bacillus coagulans, another one Bacillus subtilis, and Bacillus clausii. And for people that aren't familiar with spore probiotics, these are not human strains that are naturally found in the human digestive tract, but they are found in our environment. And most of us have them in our gut at some point because we're breathing them in, getting them in on food, and, from our fingers and all kinds of things. And these spores are incredibly beneficial to the human gut in terms of helping to eliminate excess bacteria, overload, and other issues like that, parasitic things and things like that, as well as helping to create an environment that is conducive to the replication and production of our good bacteria. And what I recommend, number one, with anybody with IBS is that formula with every meal, because they almost always are getting less enzymes than they need. They almost always have been on too many antibiotics or other things that have wiped out their gut. And so they need the probiotics. And in every case, I think just about someone with IBS is dealing with inflammation in the gut, right? So that at least addresses, as much as I could comprehensively in one capsule, a pretty wide range of things. And then depending on what else is going on, if it's constipation, oftentimes I'll recommend aloe vera juice, a good whole leaf aloe vera juice. I'm a huge believer in that because it's very anti-inflammatory.
Yes.
It tends to help with gut motility, as you were talking about. I sometimes will recommend various different herbal supplements to kind of help with gut motility. And that depends on the individual and their level of sensitivity and things like that. But sometimes I tend to like to do this for short term, but sometimes I'll recommend Cascara Sagrada to get things moving. I always ask if somebody's on magnesium.
Cascara, from people who don't know, is a herbal laxative.
Yeah. And I don't love it long term, because I do think your body can kind of build up a bit of a tolerance to it and have more of a need for it over time. But in the short term, I think it's very, very effective and very safe. And then the other thing that I really, really will ask people about is, besides the IBS, I'll ask besides general IBS, I guess is a good way to say it. I'll ask, how long after a meal do you tend to start feeling discomfort? Is it pretty immediate, or is it like 30, 35, 40 minutes later? And based on that gives me a lot of information, because if it's pretty immediate, then I'll make a pretty good educated guess that they probably are low on stomach acid. They're actually just having a hard time actually breaking down that meal right there in the stomach. And then I'll recommend sometimes apple cider vinegar capsules, sometimes betaine hydrochloride capsules. I actually lean towards vinegar over betaine because it's a little more gentle and it tends to work really, really well. It's also pretty economical and pretty easy on the stomach. And then I'll add that with the back on track. And that makes a lot of sense for most people. If they're having the issue a little bit later, then I'll sometimes recommend additional levels of digestive enzymes, or I will start that conversation about SIBO. I'll pretty much always ask about SIBO now, which, like I say, up until several years ago, I really wasn't talking about SIBO much. And I was almost never having anybody ask me about SIBO. And now lots of people are discovering that, this is a real.
So when it comes to digestive enzymes, is actually a big category of different products. Sure. So we have pancreatic enzymes, which come from animals. We have plant-based, enzymes, right? From fermented. We have brush border enzymes. We have specialized enzymes to break down cellulose, to break down lactose, to break down gluten. We even have FODMAP enzymes. So there's a huge amount of specialty enzymes. What do you think when do we want to use which of these products?
Well, I think it's really, really good for people to, and this is where I kind of go back to what I first said when we first started this conversation about, being your own best doctor to a large degree. You really have to pay attention to what it is that you're doing that creates those issues. So, after your meal, if you start to have issues and, let's just say, for instance, it's cramping and bloating or gassiness, keep a little food diary for a month or two and write down, okay, what did I eat? And how did that affect me? And how badly did it affect me? Was it a 9 out of 10 on the discomfort scale, or a 2 out of 10? Or was there no effect at all? And pay attention to that and see where you're at, because that can help you determine if you've got a lactose issue or you've got a gluten issue. It can help you determine if you're struggling more to digest fibrous foods like veggies and things like that, or you're struggling more with high protein foods. Paying attention to that is really, really big. Now, you can do something that's pretty comprehensive. I mentioned the Back on Track formula. It covers those bases pretty well. It doesn't have anything specific for people that are dealing with like real issues with gluten, but it covers lactose, it covers cellulose and protein and sugars and carbohydrates, starches, all that kind of stuff, lipase for fats. I'll also always ask if there's a gallbladder present, because lots of us have had those removed. And I just did another show about the problems with that. Because there's no gallbladder, then I'll ask.
I actually listened to that show.
Oh, did you? Yeah. So I don't know how close we are to the same page on that one, but it's a real problem for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I always ask that question too. And I'm shocked, frankly, still, even though I know the truth about it, at how many people don't have a gallbladder anymore. It's that's a real important component.
Just like you, my wife had her gallbladder out.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that's a problem. So I ask about that. And then if that's an issue, then I'll talk about lipase as an enzyme and bile salts, as another option there, particularly with high fat meals. So the big thing is, I believe the ultimate wild card in health is the individual that we're talking about, right? And so, whatever I were to recommend to you might not be what I'd take myself, based on how you might answer the question that I'm asking you. There is not a one size fits all. And when it comes to digestion, again, IBS is a pretty broad category of different symptoms. And so, but I'm comfortable saying that if I get enough feedback, that over time we can get people to a point where they're not experiencing those issues anymore. And with less issues in the gut, this, and I think inherently most people recognize this, a lot of other things upstream and downstream are doing a lot better too. When we start addressing people's IBS issues, their depression and anxiety almost always improves, because again, the gut and the brain are, inextricably connected. And if the gut's not doing well, the brain doesn't do too great either.
I've really been enjoying this discussion, but I just want to take a few minutes to tell you about a product that I'm very excited about. Imagine a device that can help you manage stress, improve your sleep, and boost your focus, all without any effort on your part. The Apollo wearable is designed to do just that. Created by neuroscientists and physicians, this innovative device uses gentle vibrations to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, helping you feel calmer, more focused, and better rested. Among the compelling reasons to use the Apollo wearable are that users experience a 40% reduction in stress and anxiety. Patients feel that they can sleep. Their sleep improves up to additional 30 minutes of sleep per night. It helps you to boost your focus and concentration. And it's scientifically backed. And the best part is you can get all these benefits with a special $40 discount by using the promo code Weitz, WEITZ, my last name, at checkout to enjoy these savings. So go to Apollo Neuro and use the promo code Weitz today. And now back to our discussion. So when it comes to probiotics, another huge category of nutrients. And interestingly, a lot of times when people talk about probiotics, they sort of talk about it as it's one thing. Like, what about probiotics? Do you recommend probiotics? And, as you talked about, spore-based, we have a huge number of specific strains that have been shown in specific studies to have different benefits.
Right.
We have categories. We have lactobacillus strains, we have bifido strains, we have Saccharomyces boulardii and healthy yeast. There's a huge number of supplements, and now we have specialty products like Akkermansia on the market. So when do you want to recommend which types of probiotics?
That's a great question, and it's a deep question, and I know that there's a lot to talk about in this topic. So I'll try and keep it, somewhat surface level, but feel free to ask any questions you want. So I am a believer, generally speaking, that the spore probiotics are probably the most universally beneficial in terms of actually really rebuilding and strengthening the gut biome. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that human strain probiotics are very, they don't have a high level of resiliency once they're removed from the gut. And so, they're used to a very specific temperature, a very specific acid level, a very specific oxygen level and moisture level and all these things. And when they're pulled out, as most people know, most probiotics are found in, a lot of probiotics anyway, are found in the refrigerator because they're not particularly shelf stable. We just talked about that acid in the stomach. It's by design there to help us prevent getting poisoning from things like, say, E. coli or salmonella or something like that, which means that acid is designed to kill bacteria. So when we take a human probiotic, which is bacteria, that acid in many cases will break that down as well. I'm not opposed to human strain probiotics. And to make sure that people are clear on this, again, spores are environmental. They're found in our environment, and human strain would be found native to the human gut. We need those bacteria. They're really, really important. And antibiotics and cesarean section births and not enough, long enough time breastfeeding or not breastfeeding. These are all things, along with glyphosate. There's so many things that are attacking our gut and our microbiome right now. So we need those guys, but it's pretty hard to get those guys back in the gut in the form of a capsule or something like that because of the stomach acid.
And by the way, spore-based are sometimes known as soil-based.
Sure.
And they start with names like Bacillus, Subtilis, Bacillus, etc. They're usually of the Bacillus family, right?
Yeah, and that gets a little confusing too, because you mentioned lactobacillus, right? So if you're looking,
right.
if you're listening to this show and you're looking at your probiotic bottle, if you see lacto at the beginning, that's a human strain. If you see bifido, that's a human strain. If it just says bacillus, not lactobacillus, then it's a spore strain. That's probably the easiest way to try and determine what you're looking at, whether or not it's a spore or a soil-based probiotic. But I love human strains for symptom relief. If somebody's really struggling, you mentioned constipation, I'll say even more so on the diarrhea side of things. If someone's really struggling with chronic diarrhea, I'll give them a human strain probiotic that's very specifically high in kind of colon-specific bacteria that has a high activity in the colon. And when you take a probiotic like that, you almost always will get symptom relief. What you usually don't get, unfortunately, is enough colonization of those strains to actually solve the problem long term. But in many cases, you'll feel better in a day or two or three. And that matters, right? We got to slow things down in that case. So what I'll tell people to get on a spore probiotic. We have our Back on Track formula. I have another spore product called Vital Spores. Get on one of those right now, but don't necessarily expect to see significant benefit in the first day or two or three. It takes a little bit of time in most cases for the spores to really kind of kick in and do their thing. So I usually recommend a minimum of like 3 months to 6 months, but I do expect people to feel better in the first 30 days, at least, somewhat better. And if they're struggling with, here and now issues, then I will recommend a human strain probiotic, because what happens with the human strains when they hit the stomach acid or when they're exposed to too much heat is they are what's called lysed. They're not technically killed. It's kind of like The Princess Bride, for people that remember that movie, where, he was mostly dead, right? These strains are kind of like that. They get lysed, which means that they're no longer able to colonize in our gut. But they can deliver benefit, because as they're moving through the gut, the microDNA that's in that bacteria will actually speak to the bacteria that's in our gut and essentially deliver marching orders, for lack of a better term. There's a lot of support there. And lysed bacteria can be extremely good for symptom relief. It's just not that great for actually rebuilding and recolonizing. And that's where the spores come in. So it really depends on what people are looking at. We hear the term postbiotic a lot now. That's another term that nobody was talking about a few years ago, and now everyone's talking about, right? Postbiotics are, for the most part, just lysed bacteria. They're bacteria that can't actually deliver a colonization, but they can in many cases deliver benefits. Akkermansia, you mentioned, is usually in the form of a postbiotic as opposed to a probiotic, even though technically if it was living, it would be a probiotic.
Right. I think you can get it refrigerated and living.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting, though? I don't know if you've read this research. So they've done studies on living Akkermansia versus what they call heat.
I know there's one study that shows that the killed Akkermansia was more effective.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Like significantly more effective. So, so it's not a bad thing to have a lice bacteria or have a postbiotic. In fact, it's a very good thing, but that won't be what recolonizes your gut.
Right. So what about prebiotics versus postbiotics, as well as probiotics?
Yeah, so prebiotics, I think, are one of the better ways to actually help to recolonize the gut. Now, it is interesting because I get this question a lot because I'm such a big fan of spore probiotics. Spore probiotics are not postbiotics, and they're not prebiotics, and they're not traditional probiotics either. They're kind of their own little animal. But what they do when they get into the gut is they actually release a bunch of different natural antibiotics. These are antibiotics that are going after pathogenic bacteria and parasites and things like that in the gut, mold, yeast, fungus, those kind of things. And they're very, very effective at helping to kind of kill off the bad guys while they're in there. The other thing that spores do is they actually create an environment of a high level of lactic acid, which is essentially food for the good bacteria. So while it's not exactly a prebiotic, it does have some prebiotic properties. And so in many cases, spores will kind of cover the base of a prebiotic, but they don't necessarily feed the good bacteria in the way that a prebiotic does. So I think using prebiotics makes a lot of sense. I personally am more of a fan of trying to include those in your diet as opposed to supplementing with them. I believe that that's how we were meant to get them anyway. And if we can include good quality prebiotic food in our diet.
So what are your favorite prebiotic foods that you like to include?
Well, I think any type of good quality fiber is generally, and I guess I shouldn't say any type, some are better than others, but most good fibrous foods make a lot of sense there.
So what are some of your favorites?
I really, really like the fruit and vegetable fibers. Specifically, I'm a big fan of cruciferous vegetables in that area, because you get some really good prebiotic fiber in cruciferous vegetables, but you also get this really cool side benefit of the DIM and the indole 3-carbinol that help with hormone balancing and detoxifying the endocrine system. So that's a kind of a win-win. Plus, they're really nutrient dense. So that's one that I try and include in my diet a lot. I also am a huge fan of mushrooms in that category. Mushrooms are another one that's this really cool dual benefit. Lots of people know about lion's mane mushroom, for instance, right now. It's probably the most well-known mushroom out there. Great for your brain, has all kinds of benefits in kind of the nootropic area. But all of the fiber in that mushroom is prebiotic in nature too. So you get a really nice dual benefit there. And it's really, really good for your immune system. So when I look at food, I look at foods that have, kind of a wide range of benefits, as opposed to just eating for one result optimally. Maybe we can get 2 or 3 benefits or more, out of that food. So those are some of my most favorites.
So you've written about, you wrote a blog post about the other ingredients and how do we tell when we look at a nutritional supplement, whether it's a quality product, whether it has a bunch of stuff in there that we don't really want. Maybe we could talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. And that's another one that there's a lot here. I'll give you some of the high level stuff that I think is most useful. The first thing is, there is not a universal way to tell if you've got a high quality supplement or you don't. That there just isn't. So you do have to get, you got to educate yourself on certain things, particularly if you're looking at specific nutrients. Like, let's just take a multivitamin, for instance. That one's a tough one because there's going to be 30, 40, 50, 60 different ingredients in there. And you got to be pretty well versed to try and figure out, what the ingredients list looks like. But let's say, for instance, you're looking at a vitamin B complex. A little bit more simple. Maybe you're going to have 10 or 11 ingredients in there, and you can look at those specific ingredients. And there are ways that you can tell if it's going to be a higher quality, more highly absorbed form than another form of that B complex. And so if you walk into a store like mine, a health store in your local community or a Whole Foods or wherever you're going to get your vitamins, you're going to see different options. I always say, look for specifically, if you're looking at anything that has B vitamins in it, look for what form of folate is in there, what form of B12 is in there, and what form of B6 is in there. Now, there's other things that you can look at too, but those are probably the big three for me.
Sure.
And you're going to want to look at a methylated form, typically of folate or B12. Or there are two other forms of B12 that I really like. One's called hydroxycobalamin. Another one's called adenosylcobalamin. The methylated form is called methylcobalamin. What you really want to avoid is probably cyanocobalamin. I'm not like anti-cyanocobalamin, but it's just the worst of the bunch. And it's the one that your body has to do the most work to actually absorb. And if you happen to fall into the category of MTHFR, for people that know what that is, you're not making methylcobalamin out of cyanocobalamin because genetically, that mutation is going to prevent you from doing that. Folic acid is easy to get in our diet. We're getting lots of it. That's the synthetic form of folate. And if you're MTHFR, it actually can act like a neurotoxin in your body, and you're not going to convert it. So we want to look at a methylated form of folate, or another form is called folinic acid. And that's a superior form that most people can manage pretty well as well. And then in B6, rather than pyridoxine, HCl is the one that will show up. You want to look for one that's called P5P. That's going to be a cell-ready form of B6. A lot of times on the front of the bottle, it'll say that it's methylated, or it'll say that it's a coenzyme form. That's good language to look for. But one of the things that's more high level that I think is really important is when you're just looking at the brand itself and you're trying to figure out, is this a brand that I trust? And there's a couple of tips that I can give people on that. I always say use Google, or if you're an AI person, use ChatGPT and just ask, who owns this brand? So let's just say, for instance, I'll pick a brand, Garden of Life, that's a pretty well-known supplement brand out there. Who owns this brand? If you throw that into Google or you throw that into ChatGPT, it's going to tell you that Nestle owns that company. I personally am not a big fan of the Nestle Corporation. I don't trust them for a lot of reasons. And if you want to Google around on why that might be, feel free to find some things. I don't want to give them my vitamin money. Even if they're making good vitamins, I don't want to give them my vitamin money. And I'm not convinced that they're going to make good vitamins. Now, at one point, Garden of Life was an awesome brand. They got sold multiple times. Now Nestle owns them. And so I am looking for brands that are optimally not owned by some drug company or mega food company or someone like Clorox that owns a lot of vitamin brands now, or Procter & Gamble that owns a lot of brands now. I'm not interested in that. I'm optimally looking at supplement companies that are supplement companies, not drug companies, not chemical companies. And I'm going to say not food companies, or at least not big processed food companies, because I just don't think they're that concerned about my health. So that's a big thing for me.
Right. I get it. I do think that some of those companies have been purchased by these bigger corporations or by drug companies. I'm pretty sure that some of them are still sort of being run by a group of ethical people, and a bigger company is basically letting them do that as long as they're profitable.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And in many cases, I think the product's just as good probably as it was prior to the purchase, at least for some period of time. Yeah. So then at that point, you use the word ethical, and that's the word I use when I say, if I'm just looking at where I want to spend my money and who I want to support from an ethical standpoint, I just want to support better companies is really what it boils down to.
I get
companies
it.
that I think are going to do better things with the money. And optimally, and this is my own bias, I'll just be the first to admit it. I'm a guy who was raised in a health food store by people that were really into this stuff.
Right.
And all of the brands in this industry back then were little mom and pop brands that were in it because they were passionate about it. They wanted to help people with it. That's what the industry was, because nobody was making very much money.
Absolutely.
And so I look now, and to some degree anyway, the smaller the company, the more likely I think, especially if it's like a little independent family-owned company, they are to probably be that same type of person. They probably got into that business because they were excited about it. The same reason you have your podcast and I have mine, right? It's not just a bottom line thing and how can we serve our corporate masters with, how much money we can.
So outside of who owns the company? What are some of the other things we want to look at for a quality supplement?
So I always look at the other ingredients. So if you're looking at a vitamin bottle while you're listening to this show, and don't do this if you're driving down the street, but if you're looking at the vitamin bottle and you look at the back, there's always what's called the supplement facts panel. The supplement facts panel is the most revealing part of a vitamin bottle. It tells you, all the ingredients, the amount of milligrams, the type of ingredient, like for instance, the type of B12 or B6, like I was just talking about. But then underneath the supplement facts panel is a little spot right under the bottom line that says other ingredients. And that's when you find out what the capsule's made of, what kind of filler or flow agent or stabilizer or whatever is in the capsule or tablet. And the first thing I look at is number of ingredients in the other ingredients. If the other ingredients has 6, 7, 8, 9 different things in it, there's a relatively good chance that some of those things aren't great. Now, you can specifically, and I recommend you do this, anybody listening to this show, look at the other ingredients on one of your supplements that you've got there on your kitchen counter or wherever, and just look at what microcrystalline cellulose is, or what silicon dioxide is, or what's another one? Magnesium stearate is, or stearic acid. There's a whole bunch of them. I don't necessarily think that most of those things are bad. In fact, I think most of the things that are added to supplements they're fine. They're kind of neutral. There's some companies that are pushing the idea that like magnesium stearate in a supplement is bad. It reduces absorption. There's literally no evidence of that. I don't use magnesium stearate because I don't know that there's not a problem in my supplements. And so I'm more on the kind of better safe than sorry approach to that. But I also don't, shun those products and think, oh, those are terrible because of this. But there are a lot of things in those supplements that might surprise you. And this is usually going to happen in your big box store supplements. The number one vitamin D, I think, at least it used to be, in America is made by Kirkland, Costco. And their vitamin D, last I checked, and this could have changed, I don't know, had artificial color in it, caramel color. And it's like, well, why would I want artificial color in my vitamin D? It makes absolutely no sense. And the oil that the vitamin D is stabilized in is soybean oil, which is almost definitely genetically modified. Soybean oil has 100 other problems with it. It's a seed oil, and so it's more inflammatory in nature. It's highly processed. And so if I'm taking a supplement to get something good like vitamin D, why would I want an artificial color and a seed oil that's highly processed and probably genetically modified as a companion to it? And so those types of things, be a more aware consumer and recognize that those things matter, those other ingredients matter. And again, if we had 5 hours, I could go through every single other ingredient and we could talk about it. And I've done that. That blog post has some of that information. I've got some shows like that too. But just not taking the bullet points on the front of the bottle as all you need to know about that supplement. There's a lot more there.
And by the way, that same thing about the other ingredients is even worse when you look at most prescription drugs.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing how many prescription drugs have talcum powder in it.
Yeah.
Which is, we know is highly carcinogenic and, was taken out of baby powder. And yet it's in there because it's a flow agent.
Yeah. And it's cheap, and it keeps things dry. So there's utility to it. There's a reason why they use it, but they could use something else and create the same benefit without the negatives. But it's industry. Again, it's like if the most important thing is the bottom line, you're going to cut the most corners that you can to get to that bottom line. And that's why I'm always looking for brands that I think have more of an ethical approach to how they're producing their products and a little bit more passion behind it, not just, what are we going to do for our bottom line?
Right. One of the things that's common in our environment, there's obviously a huge amount of environmental toxins. We have plastics. We have a lot of these chemicals end up being endocrine disruptors. So they affect our hormones. A lot of them are estrogenic, but they could also affect testosterone as well. And so what do we do about endocrine disruptors? Which are some of the ones we want to be most concerned about? And interestingly, some of the testing companies now are including, especially the companies that test hormones by urine, are including endocrine disruptors in their testing.
Which is awesome. I mean,
right.
The more information we've got, that's great. And in fact, I'd be curious, do you order blood tests for your clients?
We do, yes.
Okay. I'd actually be curious, we could talk about it now or after the show, but I'd be curious what you think are the best tests that are showing for that.
Right. Well, Vibrant has a urine test that includes, it's called the Hormone Zoomer. That includes
what's the name of the company?
Vibrant America.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the premier functional medicine testing companies, and they pretty much offer everything, all the standard tests, most of the specialized tests. They got a great micronutrient test. They have testing for Lyme. They have gut testing, and they have a urine hormone test that includes endocrine disruptors that they came out.
I love it. So I'm going to look into that. I appreciate it. That's very cool. And way past due, really, because this is a big problem. If you're
trying to balance someone's hormones, or you're giving them hormones and their hormones are all messed up by these endocrine disrupting substances.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting thing because, I've been doing this a long time. And one of the things that I do a lot of is just kind of observing how things have changed since I was a little kid versus now that I'm in my 50s, and just talking to people coming into my store. I never used to see guys in their 20s coming in with low testosterone. That just wasn't even a thing 20 to 30 years ago, right? And I know you see it all the time, guys in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah, it's crazy. Guys in their 20s or 30s with the testosterone of 150.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I talk to guys in their 20s that have half the testosterone I've got at 53. Yeah. And it's just kind of mind blowing. And then women that are coming in with testosterone that's like zero or near zero on the free testosterone test, that kind of thing.
And by the way, for men, as opposed to women, as we get older, our testosterone doesn't necessarily drop off a cliff like women's does.
Yeah, it doesn't have to, but it often does, right?
It often does. But if you keep yourself healthy, like myself, I'm 67. My total testosterone is 900.
Yeah. And because very simply, you're taking care of yourself, right? And that's the key, because I believe at this point that the biggest, I don't know what the word is, under the radar major health concern in America is the endocrine disrupting chemicals and how they're impacting our endocrine systems. Because we all know about heart disease. We all know about diabetes. We all know about cancer. We know about these different things, and we talk about these things a lot. But nobody really talks a lot. I shouldn't say nobody, but you're not hearing a lot about what's going on at the endocrine system level. I mean, it's really just functional medicine doctors that are talking about it.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot.
And not even all functional medicine doctors are paying a lot of attention to it.
Okay.
Some more than others, for sure.
Right.
But it's a big problem. And And so we need to be aware of this, and not just aware of it like, okay, well, my testosterone is low, so I need to go get something to boost my testosterone. But the question I have to ask is always, okay, well, why is it low? And what can we do to address that? Because yes, it might make sense for someone to go on bioidentical hormones to increase their testosterone. And I don't have a problem with that if that's, what makes sense in that individual case based on all of the information that's there. But if that person has not looked into detoxifying their body of these endocrine disruptors and detoxifying their home of the things that are creating endocrine disruption and detoxifying their diet of the things that are creating endocrine disruption, then they're really missing a huge piece of that puzzle. For about the last year, my wife and I have actually been working on an endocrine disruptor detox protocol that we've been spending hours and hours and hours, because this is what I've seen, and I'll be curious, Ben, what you're seeing in your world. I see a lot of people educating on what the endocrine disruptors are, like avoid scented candles, don't use Glade plugins, switch your laundry detergent, don't use perfume and
eat organic.
all of that's really important.
Don't use plastic water bottles. Don't use Teflon pans.
Exactly. And all of that's important because avoidance is the biggest thing. But we know, based on some multiple studies that I've read now, that if you clean up your act entirely, your home is basically chemical free. You're storing everything in glass instead of plastic. You're drinking out of stainless or glass instead of plastic, and all these different things that you can do. You're going to eliminate maybe 60 to 65% of these chemicals, and the rest of them are airborne. We're going to get them when we walk into somebody else's house or business. You go to a restaurant, and you have to run to the bathroom, and you walk in the bathroom. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, and you hear this as they spray some disinfectant, stinky chemical into the air that then you have to breathe for the next few minutes. You're not avoiding all of them, even if you're avoiding them as much as you can in the environment that you can control.
Right.
So we always have to be aware that our body is consistently under attack with these things. And so we have to put our defenses up, and just avoiding them is not enough. So I mentioned earlier my big love of cruciferous vegetables, because they have a couple of compounds, indole-3-carbinol and DIM, that help to actually metabolize these things. And basically, if you look at it in really, really simple terms, essentially, if your body makes a hormone and it goes to the cell receptor to deliver the message that hormone naturally delivers, then it's naturally metabolized and it moves through the liver and then out through, either the urine or through the bowel. That's how it's supposed to work. Endocrine disrupting chemicals, they go and they make an attachment at the same receptor site that your progesterone, your estrogen, your testosterone would normally attach to. But they're like an unwanted house guest that won't leave after Thanksgiving, or your 2-year-old son who won't move out of the basement, or whatever it is that you can make a metaphor for in life, right? And they just hang out there, and they need to be pulled from the system. And the way that we do that is we open up our detox pathways, make sure that our liver is working well, using liver detox herbs like dandelion and milk thistle and artichoke and things like that can be really, really effective. I developed a formula as part of this protocol we're working on called Liver Vitality for that purpose. We need to make sure that the bowel is moving consistently, once or twice a day, a good bowel movement at least, to make sure things are moving through like they should, because we have to make sure that once we've metabolized these toxins, they're able to get out of the body. But these key elements, the DIM and the indole-3-carbinol, and another one's called calcium D-glucarate, these are what kind of unlock that bond and pull them out of the cell so the body can then get rid of them. And if you think about your cell receptor, like you would think of an ear, if there's something in that ear that's not delivering a message, which these fake hormones don't deliver, right, then when your hormones come knocking on the door, it's like you got your ears plugged and the cell can't get the message, right? And the body's constantly trying to figure out what hormones to produce, what hormones not to produce. Am I throttling things up or throttling things down? And if there's a bunch of these chemicals in those cell receptors, then the body doesn't know what to produce. And that is endocrine disruption, or endocrine noise, you could call it. Something's in the way and the body is trying to figure out what the heck to do. I've had so much success over the years recommending supplements just to detoxify endocrine disruptors, and having men increase their testosterone by 100 or 200 points within a couple of months.
What's the protocol for detoxing endocrine disruptors?
Well, the two most important things, the first thing is making sure your bowels are moving consistently. So if you're constipated, you got to get that going.
Yeah, you can't detox anything if you're not pooping.
That's right. So that has to be happening. And if it's not, then, there are a lot of things that you can look at for that. But make sure that that's happening first. Then I recommend a good liver detox supplement. Like I say, the one that I make is called Liver Vitality, but there are a lot of good ones on the market. I recommend that for a minimum of 30 to 60 days. I don't recommend it daily. I don't think liver detox, especially with things like milk thistle that are strong herbs, makes sense every single day. Although I do like dandelion can be taken daily, NAC can be taken daily. These are good things to help with your liver. But make sure you do a nice detox of the liver so that the pathway out is open. Then I recommend, we have a formula called EndoCleanse. And EndoCleanse has the DIM, the indole-3-carbinol, calcium D-glucarate. It has a couple of gentle liver detoxing herbs to make sure that process is still happening like it should. And it has other supportive herbs for the endocrine system. And what I based this on is years of recommending these individual ingredients on their own or other brands' formulas that I liked. And EndoCleanse came from, I'd say, probably about 15 years of just really consistent experience trying to help people detoxify their endocrine system and seeing really good results. Because as I was saying, I've seen men just doing this, a month of liver detoxification with a couple of months of endocrine detoxification, increase their free testosterone by as much as a couple hundred points. And that's not adding any testosterone to the system or even anything that stimulates testosterone. It's just clearing the path and letting the body do what the body wants to do, right?
Right.
So I'm a huge believer in at least 3 months a year of a good liver and endocrine detoxification program. And again, the one that I make is Liver Vitality and EndoCleanse, but there are other good ones out there as well. And see what that does first, because my feeling is always there's basically two things that have to be addressed for optimal health physically. Now, I think there's a lot of mental, emotional there too, but physically, there's two things. You got to get rid of whatever's in the body that is damming up the process. In the case of endocrine disrupting chemicals, it's that. The things that are getting in the way of the body doing its normal work. And then you've got to provide nutrition to the body so that the body can make what it's supposed to make. And so if you get rid of the roadblocks and you create, put the fuel in, for lack of a better term, then the car drives pretty good. And then you see where you're at. So if you're, going into a place like yours where they can get all these tests and figure out what their levels are, and, you got a 40-year-old guy that's at 289 or whatever on his total testosterone, which I bet you see all the time.
Absolutely.
Right. Then, we know where he is. We know what his baseline is on his free testosterone. You're probably testing for his total as well as free testosterone. You know where things are. Do a 3-month detox like what I'm recommending and go back and get another test and see where you're at. I'll guarantee you in just about every case there's going to be significant improvement. It's probably still makes sense at that point for a lot of men and women to still do something in addition to that, whether it's herbal or nutrient-based testosterone boosting or some sort of a bioidentical program. But if you don't clear the path first and let the body do its best to get there, then I think you've missed a huge piece of the puzzle.
That sounds great. So I think we've had a really good discussion for the last hour or so, Jared. I appreciate that.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So give us some final thoughts and your contact information for people who want to get in touch with you.
Well, as far as final thoughts go, I'll say this. I believe that there is always hope for better health. And a lot of people I know that come into your office and plenty of people that come into my store are pretty darn frustrated with their health when they first walk in those doors, right? Sure. And sometimes I know I've heard this from my clients. I'm like their last resort. They've already tried this and that and this, and somebody recommended they come down and see me, and they're like, man, I'm just fed up. I don't even know what to do. But there's always hope. There's always hope, and there's always a way to optimize your health and improve your health. So don't ever give up. Be willing to do some, real experimentation with natural things that are pretty hard to harm yourself with and can create a lot of benefits. And try to do your best. If you're still a little stuck in what I consider to be kind of a broken system when it comes to modern medicine, and you find yourself on 4 or 5 or 6 prescriptions and you don't feel good, then I think that's telling you something. And there are other ways that you can go. So those would be my final thoughts. But as far as reaching me, my podcast is the best way. If you enjoyed what you heard today, I do a lot of this on my podcast. I will give you kind of the intro to what I do on my podcast. And I say that Vitality Radio is the podcast where we help you master natural supplements, enhance emotional vitality, and thrive without the use of pharma drugs. And that's pretty much what I talk about, those 3 things. And that's Vitality Radio Podcast. My store is in Bountiful, Utah. So if you happen to have listeners in Utah, I'm sure you do. We'd love to see you in person. You can call us no matter where you're at. We're happy to have a conversation with you. If you have questions about supplements, 801-292-6662. Our website is vitalitynutrition.com, and we have a chat feature there. And if you are an Instagram person, that's our biggest presence online as far as social media. And it's just at Vitality Nutrition Bountiful.
That's great. By the way, I love the fact that you're standing and you're using great use of your hands. I love it. You're really good at that.
I don't know how to talk without my hands.
Me too. Okay. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you could go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star ratings and review. As you may know, I continue to accept a limited number of new patients per month for functional medicine. If you would like help overcoming a gut or other chronic health condition and want to prevent chronic problems and want to promote longevity, please call my Santa Monica Weitz Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition office at 310-395-3111, and we can set you up for a consultation for functional medicine. And I will talk to everybody next week.